Zach here, from Gravel Bike, California, above Saratoga, as we're going to traipse around a few Bay Area counties heading up to Midpen. Now, this area of the Santa Cruz Mountains has a lot of history from the late 19th century, including an early wine industry that survived Prohibition. Now, today I'm being joined by Mike and Andy, who are probably the two most knowledgeable people in the Bay Area for bike routes. I'm nervous because it's kind of like, why does the president and vice president not travel together? I hope I don't take them out. Let's roll. Today's adventure started off around the quaint town of Saratoga, which has its roots in a number of industries from the mid-19th century, also serving as a toll gate for some important roads. But it's a much different tone heading up into the hills, not just for these Robin Leach-sized estates, but for a number of historical wineries that predate Prohibition. Mike and Andy plotted out a 35-mile loop, which got extended to 40 on the fly because they really love trails. Needless to say, we had to be quiet for the start of our ride, heading out of Cooley Park off of Stevens Canyon, where we'd see a good amount of riders on the road, making an immediate right up Mount Eden. Cold. Our first 6 miles was paved and generally upward, which is more likely to put a smile on your face early rather than later, but there was a little downhill, which allowed us to awkwardly manage layers. That was reinforced on our right turn onto Pierce, with not a lot of elbow room to climb, as we were all in concert to shed our tops at this short peak next to Mountain Winery that pairs as a concert venue, which wasn't in its business plans back in the 1800s. Obviously, we got some gravity assist from here, which was the last burst of speed we'd experienced for a while, as the switch would flip merging onto Big Basin Way, indiscriminately starting 2,500 feet of climbing in under 8 miles. And the prudent move would be to reevaluate your choices at Saratoga Springs, which has been a picnic area since the 1870s, as the turn off to Sanborn was just to the left, where it's time you have to fully commit to this ride. Biking by a creek normally suggests mild grades, but we were all stretching out our lowest gears, with the elongating trees not helping with our perspective, as I was starting to wonder the reasoning behind Andy and his mountain bike, because the sight of our first piece of dirt made you realize how easy we had it until now. If you've ever showed up to one of those crazy hill climbing challenges, you don't normally ride segments like these on your own, as I tried rationalizing if I was actually still on vacation. But Mike and Andy weren't complaining much, even though the 1 kilometer Lake Ranch trail averaged 13%, I was surprised that it finally led up, and also glad that it was appropriately named, because I was not expecting anything flat, as I was ready to transition into Picnic Bike California. But the crew wanted to leave this plainer existence as we headed up the John Nicholas Trail, a 3-mile climb averaging a modest 6.6% with over 1,000 feet of gain, which is defined by 2 main hallmarks: an amazing density of trees and a disorienting amount of turns. Under all these conditions comes a diminishing amount of light, which is why I was impressed how smooth this trail was. But even with all these tree roots around, don't expect perfection or a good solution how this car got here, with bridges reinforcing this is a well-kept trail, as well as a reactive stance on downed trees. But a stop was compulsory with 1/3 of a mile left, getting a rare peek of Silicon Valley and beyond, and a look at the color blue, since it felt like an hour since we saw the sky. Our open space prayers were briefly answered as we connected with the Skyline Trail for 3 miles, which paralleled the boulevard with the same name. And while this segment had a slight gain overall, expect all of your gears to remain involved, as the only consistency was its inconsistency, and you really needed institutional knowledge, like Mike had, in order to know which line to choose.
Impossible.
While we could have continued on along the Skyline Trail, we exited out of Sanborn County Park briefly, as rolling onto said boulevard allowed me for a dental check and our best chance for water refills and restroom facilities, turning into Castle Rock State Park, where once again I couldn't get picnicking off my mind. We weren't Willie Nelsoning it for long, as we hopped right back onto the Skyline Trail, this time for another 2.5 miles. And while there were moments to throw it in the small ring, overall we dropped about 400 feet in this segment to let gravity have its moment, with that brief stretch paralleling the road until we were again fully immersed by this woodland, to the point you had to stay focused where the apertures were, know when the proper time when to bank off these curves, and hope that these down trees didn't just happen with the initiative already taken to chop them in half. And after all this assessment, we emerged to daylight once again, finding us intersecting with Big Basin Highway for a second time. And what? Already more off-roading? Starting the Saratoga Gap Trail felt like being pulled at the beginning of a roller coaster ride, where our interlude with the grasslands was brief, and while it was hard to imagine we weren't even halfway done yet, this trail stuck to the common theme of flowy single track, with the occasional push here and there, while not completely topping out its speed, as this intersection signaled we were near the end of this segment with just a 1/4 mile left, completing this 2-mile trail. But crossing Skyline didn't just bring this ascent, as it started a whole new chapter into open space that others got in on as well, where we took a moment for appreciation of these views that could really take up a lot of time since there was so much acreage to comprehend. But we couldn't bask for too long, needing to get rolling with the sun coming down, as the grasslands were a welcome change, even with the occasional dip into the canopies, because with the space above, felt like pure bliss. Even though we were in the Long Ridge Open Space Preserve, it was back into the trees for us. And while our original route had us returning onto Skyline, of course Andy and Mike knew of a dirt alternative, making our way onto the Ridge Trail that temporarily introduced a different scale of foliage, which felt like a compromise between all the topiary we'd already seen, and this was a welcome change, even with the bike obstacle course built in. But a lot of quirks continue to pop out, like an unexpected shack for all your chestnut needs that sent us down into single track into a tight hairpin turn that had been out of our vocabulary for a while, exiting it out to what else but a Christmas tree farm. But be careful getting into the holiday spirit, as the dirt led us into a steep descent around vehicles, and getting a warning ahead of time not to miss the turn at the bottom, scoring Mike even more extra credit points. And while passing this horseshoe-shaped lake rose our spirits, the climb added after achieved just the opposite, averaging double digits for a kilometer. But even reaching the top was disorienting, thinking I was looking east, not west, because of the changing sun, and passing by another lake made me wonder if we were in Minnesota, as crossing the 25-mile mark signaled a change of surface for what I'd be thankful for. How about you guys? This road feels so nice. Landing on Alpine Road, flipped to Page Mill, crossing Skyline, which would have taken us back. But I had to believe there was something different in store, and while turning onto Upper White Oak Trail did instill confidence at first, there was some sorting out at the halfway point of this mile trail, which was a detail that would be revealed to me later. So exiting out soon into the parking lot seemed like a little odd choice, especially finding ourselves back onto Page Mill, turning onto what looked like the questionably public Monte Bello road, not expecting a 6% climb over a mile, but glad signage around okayed our presence. As hitting our turnaround, I literally followed suit, layering up as we took the Old Ranch Trail to Bella Vista, where it was time to really let go, as the great surface and flowy turns make for the funnest segment of the day. It looked like we did a double take rolling past the canyon trail, only to head up through the previously visited parking lot to return on Upper White Oak, creating a lollipop on our map. But we stopped at the earlier mentioned intersection as Andy went ahead, meaning there must be a good reason for him to snap pictures, as we still had a lot of elevation to give back, starting out on the lower White Oak Trail. And while we were back to weaving and bobbing around trees, this time our hands were not as occupied with our brakes, and we were measuring more smileage than mileage. Our speeds gradually eased up a bit. This is our 100th bridge we've crossed, and had to use muscles that had been dormant for a while to get up to the previously mentioned canyon trail, which we caught on for our last 5 miles of dirt that closely follows Stevens Creek, which was once the land of the native Tombian who settled along the many tributaries. From a riding perspective, the canyon trail was very unique, being one of the straightest forested paths I've taken, but also how gradually this passage narrowed as we lost out on our comfortable width and narrowed to a point where I questioned whether we were going the right way. And we had to do some searching, alleviated by the sign, and we were fortunate to cross the creek before rain season had hit. But coming out, we were glad space expanded like an accordion as elbow room returned, as well as pavement, taking Stevens Canyon Road for the remainder, which after merging with Redwood Gulch Road, became quite a bit busier, making us thankful for having lights, as it would take more than a lack of sunshine to keep Mike and Andy from riding. I think the lack of daylight pretty much tells you everything. I mean, so many trails. I'm sure even those guys forgot how many we've done. That's why we make these videos. Try and relive it all, because this was a lot of great dirt. Yeah, it's hard to process. Anyways, if you want to support us, please go ahead, hit the subscribe button, or check us out on Patreon or our shop, so we can bring you more. Stay to dirt.